Hello, I'm Natalie Wood. This is one of my favorite books, Marjorie Morningstar. I just had the opportunity of playing.
For more than 4 decades, the death of Natalie Wood has haunted Hollywood. A mystery cloaked in whispers, suspicion, and sorrow. On that fateful night of November 29, 1981, the beautiful and talented actress vanished from a yacht off the coast of California. Her body discovered hours later floating in the dark Pacific waters. Officially, it was ruled an accident, but few ever believed that story. The details never quite added up. Natalie was just 43 years old, a Hollywood icon at the peak of her career and the center of one of Tinseltown's most glamorous marriages. Her husband, Robert Wagner, a charming leading man beloved by audiences, suddenly became the focus of endless speculation. What happened that night between them? Why were there only 3 people on the boat? Natalie, Robert, and actor Christopher Walken. And yet so many unanswered questions. For years, Robert Wagner kept silent, brushing off inquiries with vague denials or emotional pleas for privacy. But now, after decades of public pressure, witness testimonies, and reopened investigations, the truth has begun to surface. And it isn't pretty. What Wagner finally revealed in his later years has shaken the Hollywood world once again. Was it guilt, age, or the burden of a secret too heavy to carry any longer? Whatever it was, Robert Wagner's confession has changed how the world sees Natalie Wood's death, and the man she loved until the very end. The evening of November 28, 1981, began like many others in the glamorous lives of Hollywood's elite. Natalie Wood and her husband Robert Wagner had invited actor Christopher Walken to join them aboard their yacht, the Splendor, for what was supposed to be a relaxing weekend off California's Catalina Island. The 3 had been filming together, and it was meant to be a quiet getaway. But by the next morning, that calm had shattered forever. Witnesses reported hearing raised voices echoing across the water that night. Some said it sounded like an argument, while others claimed they heard a woman crying for help. Just hours later, Natalie's lifeless body was found floating near the boat, dressed in a nightgown, socks, and a red jacket. Her death was officially ruled an accidental drowning. But the mystery only deepened when details from the investigation began to emerge. The dinghy from the yacht, called the Valiant, was found beached nearby. The engine was off, and there were no signs that Natalie had tried to start it. Many wondered, why would a woman with a lifelong fear of dark water and open seas take a small boat out alone in the middle of the night? Robert Wagner's account of that night changed multiple times. In one version, he said Natalie went to bed early. In another, he said she disappeared after a brief disagreement. Meanwhile, Christopher Walken remained quiet for decades, rarely speaking about what truly happened. The inconsistencies created an endless storm of suspicion, one that has followed Wagner for more than 40 years. Natalie's younger sister, Lana Wood, never accepted the official version of events. She became one of the loudest voices demanding the truth, insisting that her sister's death was no accident. Natalie was terrified of water, she said in interviews. She would never, ever have gone out alone that night. In 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the case after new witnesses came forward, including the yacht's captain, Dennis Devern. He revealed that the night was filled with tension, claiming that Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken had been arguing and that Natalie had seemed upset and frightened. Devern admitted that he didn't tell the whole truth back in 1981 because he was protecting. Wagner. Investigators reclassified the case from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors, citing bruises on Natalie's body that suggested she may have been assaulted before falling into the water. Wagner, who was officially named a person of interest, continued to deny any wrongdoing, maintaining that it was a tragic accident and nothing more. But as the years passed and Wagner grew older, whispers began to surface that he had privately confessed more than he ever admitted publicly. According to those closest to him, the weight of that night never left him. He spoke of regrets, of things said in anger, and of moments he wished he could take back. The truth about Natalie Wood's final hours remains one of Hollywood's darkest and most painful mysteries. Yet, with each passing year, the silence surrounding that night grows thinner, and the line between guilt and grief becomes harder to separate. Robert Wagner's life since that night has been defined by two things: love and suspicion. He loved Natalie deeply, by his own words, but the shadow of what happened aboard the Splendor has followed him ever since. Whatever truly happened in those final, tragic hours, one thing is certain: the truth didn't sink with Natalie. It lingered, buried beneath decades of fame, denial, and heartbreak, waiting for the day when the man who loved her would finally speak. Before that tragic night off Catalina Island, Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner were considered one of Hollywood's most picture-perfect couples. Their romance was the kind of story tabloids adored. Beautiful, talented stars whose love seemed straight out of a movie script. Natalie, the dazzling brunette who'd grown up before America's eyes in classics like Rebel Without a Cause and West Side Story, met Wagner when she was still a teenager. He was the tall, handsome actor every studio wanted, and every woman dreamed about. They first crossed paths in 1956 at a Hollywood party. Natalie later admitted that she had once told her mother she'd marry Robert Wagner someday, and in 1957, her dream came true. She became Mrs. Robert Wagner at just 19 years old. Their wedding was a major event, covered by magazines across the country. To the public, they were the golden couple of Hollywood, glamorous, young, and in love. But behind the elegant red carpet smiles, their marriage was far from perfect. Fame brought constant scrutiny, long separations, and endless rumors. Both of them struggled with jealousy. Natalie because of Robert's reputation as a ladies' man, and Robert because of Natalie's growing stardom. By 1962, just 5 years after their wedding, the pressure became too much, and the couple divorced. For years, it seemed their love story had ended. Natalie went on to marry British producer Richard Gregson and had a daughter, Natasha. Wagner, too, moved on with his career and relationships. But destiny wasn't finished with them. In 1972, 10 years after their divorce, Natalie and Wagner reconnected. By then, both were older, wiser, and more aware of how rare their connection truly was. Natalie had divorced Gregson, and when she ran into Wagner again, the spark reignited almost instantly. Friends said it was as if no time had passed. They were drawn together by something deeper than fame or nostalgia. They remarried that same year, in an intimate ceremony attended by only close friends and family. It was meant to be their second chance, a chance to do things right. Natalie's daughter Natasha was just a child, and Wagner adopted her as his own, showing a side of him that few outside their home ever saw. Gentle, patient, and devoted. But as the years passed, old habits crept back in. Both were ambitious, passionate, and strong-willed. Qualities that made them magnetic on screen, but combustible in private. Friends recalled tension in their home, moments of jealousy, and long periods apart while filming. Still, they appeared happy in public, determined to protect the image of a perfect Hollywood love story. Those closest to them said Natalie adored Wagner, but feared his temper. He, in turn, struggled with her independence and her closeness to other actors. When Christopher Walken entered the picture, her co-star in Brainstorm, it reportedly reignited Wagner's old insecurities. Their final weekend together aboard the Splendor was supposed to be a romantic escape, a chance to unwind before the holidays. But instead, it became a turning point, one that ended with heartbreak and questions that would haunt both families forever. In the years since Natalie's death, Wagner has often spoken of her as the love of his life. He once said in an interview, "We had our ups and downs, but we always found our way back to each other." Those who knew them best believe that statement holds a painful truth. That love, no matter how powerful, can't always overcome the cracks formed by time, pride, and secrets. Their story remains both beautiful and tragic, a love too strong to forget, but too fragile to survive. And it's within that tension, that storm of affection and regret, that the mystery of Natalie Wood's death still lives on. When Natalie Wood's body was pulled from the cold waters off Catalina Island, the world demanded answers. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department quickly launched an investigation, but what followed was far from straightforward. From the start, there were inconsistencies, missing timelines, and unanswered questions that left even seasoned investigators uneasy. Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, were the only people aboard the Splendor that night. According to the official report in 1981, Natalie had somehow gone missing after a night of drinking. Wagner claimed he thought she had gone to bed, only to discover hours later that she was gone and that the small dinghy, the Valiant, was missing too. The police accepted the story that she must have accidentally fallen while trying to secure the boat, a theory that many found hard to believe. The coroner's report concluded that Natalie had drowned, but there were troubling details: fresh bruises on her arms and legs, a scratch on her cheek, and a cut on her forehead. Despite these signs of possible struggle, the case was closed as an accidental drowning. For years, the truth seemed buried under Hollywood's bright lights. Then, in 2011, new information reignited the case. Dennis Davern, the yacht's captain, went public, admitting that he had not told the full story decades earlier. He claimed that the couple had been arguing that night and that Wagner had been furious with Christopher Walken over how close he seemed to be with Natalie. Davern alleged that Wagner's temper had flared and that something terrible might have happened before Natalie disappeared. This revelation forced authorities to reopen the case. Investigators interviewed dozens of new witnesses who claimed they had heard a woman's screams from the water that night. Some said they heard cries for help that lasted for nearly 15 minutes before going silent. These haunting details painted a much darker picture than the one presented in 1981. In 2012, the Los Angeles County coroner amended Natalie's death certificate, changing the cause from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. The report noted that bruises found on her body were inconsistent with an accidental fall. It was the clearest indication yet that something violent may have occurred aboard the yacht. By 2018, Robert Wagner was officially named a person of interest. The move was not an accusation of guilt, but it marked a major shift. For the first time, the man who had been closest to Natalie that night was under renewed scrutiny. Detectives stated publicly that Wagner's statements over the years had been inconsistent and that they believed he knew more than he was telling. Still, Wagner refused to cooperate further. His family insisted that the renewed attention was unfair and cruel, especially given his age. Wagner maintained that he loved Natalie deeply, and that her death had been nothing more than a tragic accident. But the questions wouldn't go away. Every few years, new documentaries, witness interviews, and true crime specials would resurface the case, keeping it alive in the public eye. Even Christopher Walken, who had stayed mostly silent, eventually gave a brief statement saying, "Nobody knows exactly what happened. It was an accident, that's all." To this day, Natalie Wood's death remains one of Hollywood's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. The facts never quite align, and the emotions behind them never fade. For investigators, the case became a haunting echo, one that refuses to die, even after 4 decades. And while Wagner may have avoided formal charges, his reputation never fully recovered. To some, he's a grieving husband unfairly targeted by rumors. To others, he's a man who's kept one devastating secret for far too long. As Robert Wagner entered his later years, the world seemed to move on from the scandal that had once surrounded him. Yet, those closest to the veteran actor say he never truly escaped the ghost of that night. The death of Natalie Wood remained a shadow over his life, a painful wound that time couldn't heal. And eventually, that shadow began to speak louder than ever before. In private conversations, friends and family claim Wagner opened up about that fateful evening in a way he never dared to publicly. One close associate revealed that Wagner admitted there had been a terrible argument aboard the Splendor, one that escalated far more than he ever intended. He described words said in anger, a burst of emotion, and then a silence that felt endless. He never went as far as to confess to causing her death, but those who heard him talk said the guilt was unmistakable. In his 2008 autobiography, Pieces of My Heart, Wagner addressed the tragedy for the first time, writing that jealousy had indeed played a part that night. He admitted that he had argued with Christopher Walken, believing that Walken was encouraging Natalie to focus more on her career than on their family. Wagner wrote that after the argument, he went to bed, and when he woke up, Natalie was gone. It was a story that sounded simple, but between the lines, many saw a man trying to make peace with something far heavier. The way he spoke about Natalie was filled with love and remorse, as if he were trying to rewrite the ending to a story he could never change. Losing her was the greatest heartbreak of my life, he said in interviews, his voice trembling. Over the years, those around Wagner noticed how much the weight of suspicion wore him down. Friends described him as withdrawn, quieter, and less willing to talk about the past. He spent much of his time at home with his wife, Jill St. John, living a life of privacy and reflection. Yet, even as he aged, the case continued to follow him. A constant reminder of a night that the world refused to forget. For Natalie's family, closure has never truly come. Her sister Lana still believes her death was no accident. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I want the truth. That's all." And for Natalie's daughters, Natasha Gregson Wagner and Courtney Wagner, the tragedy left scars that time has only softened, not erased. Natasha has often defended her stepfather, calling him a loving and devoted man. But she also admits that the pain of her mother's loss remains a defining part of her life. In the end, Robert Wagner's confession isn't the clear-cut admission many expected. It's not a headline-grabbing revelation or a courtroom confession. It's the quiet acknowledgement of a man burdened by regret, haunted by what-ifs. Whether he's guilty of wrongdoing or simply of silence, Wagner carries the unbearable truth of being the last person to see Natalie Wood alive. In one of his final interviews about the tragedy, he said softly, "There are some things in life that never leave you. You learn to live with them, but they never stop hurting." It was perhaps the closest he ever came to admitting that the truth, whatever it was, still haunted him. Today, as he nears the end of his life, the mystery remains, unsolved, unspoken, and unbearably tragic. The love story that once captivated Hollywood ended not with a happy ever after, but with a question that still echoes through the decades. What really happened to Natalie Wood that night? And perhaps, as Robert Wagner himself once suggested, some truths are too painful to ever say out loud, but too heavy to carry forever.